Hi, this is Matt at AppWorks, and in this video, we're going to be taking a look at several tips for using the calculation dialog in FileMaker and different calculations and writing methods for calculations. And we have 8 great tips for you, and I'm going to start off with one of my favorites of all time, which is to use the data viewer to write calculations. So frequently when you think of calculations, especially if you've been using a FileMaker a long time, the first place you might go to is in the structure of a database. So you go to, manage database, and then you go into a field and you have calculated fields. Well, this is probably one of the worst places to write calculations, actually, because it uses up space in the schema. More and more as I've developed, calculations have been pushed down to the layout, and we've got a couple really specific tips for that. But the place to start writing them is actually to go to Tools and Data Viewer. This has 2 tabs on it. One of them shows you all the currently running scripts, all the global variables that have been instantiated, and also if you're running in script debugger, it shows you data that's going on as the script is running, which is great. But I want to get to the Watch tab. And in the Watch tab, you can actually build a list of calculations, and you can start typing kind of whatever you want. So if I just do a simple calculation like this one, it just evaluates it right away, so long as this checkbox is checked for automatically evaluate. Not only can you evaluate this way, but if you get data directly from your database, so for example, if you say I want to get company name, and then maybe like return and maybe the phone number. Oh, need one more ampersand up here. Then it will show you data directly from the database, and you could any kind of a statement that you write will evaluate in here. And this will stay when you quit FileMaker, and will work across all the different databases. So it's not part of the file that you're in; it's part of your local copy of FileMaker is how this is saved. So this is a really, really useful feature. And in many of the tips that we're going to look at today, I'm actually going to be starting my calculation here in this tool. So let's go on to tip number 7, which is using a calculation on a tab to show the count of records. So for example, if I want to see how many notes I have as I flip through records, some of these have more notes, and we can kind of see this is already working over in invoices. How do I do that? So here's how I do it. So in this one is really simple, so I'm not going to write the calculation in Data Viewer. But if I click on my tab widget, and I go to Notes, and I click Specify. So right now it just has the word notes in quotes, which is how that would work. And so I'm going to add here a simple calculation, which just does the count. And it's going to count the relationship CU note. And it's going to count the primary key in that table. Very simple. And then you always must click Rename. And then now when I go to my layout, as I flip through my records, 0 notes, 11 notes. So without having to click over to that tab, it'll show me how many there are. I've gone a little farther on this one for invoices, and I put it in brackets so you can kind of see. You can go even farther, and you can make them bold or italic, or change the font size, or use emojis or things like that in your calculation. Or a different state, like show nothing if there's none, but then a count if there's some. So there's all kinds of different things you can do there. Let's move on to number 6, and that is conditional visibility. So sometimes you can use a really simple conditional visibility thing like if is empty, like something that you do with conditional formatting. For example, if there's no phone number in Office Phone, this one already has conditional formatting on it to turn the field yellow. So for example, if I'm clicking through my database and I get to this record, which has no phone number, it's formatted as yellow. But I want to do more than that. I want to put like a little widget here that says, phone number, work phone number required, so I'll start with a really simple one. This is a little bit lame, but we're going to do a better one in a second. That has a just a left arrow, but not really a very graphic one, and says phone number required. And then the calculation for this to make this visible, because I don't want this to show up all the time. I only want this to show up if there is no phone number. And so making conditional visibility is a little odd because you have to sort of think in terms of double negatives. And so on the data tab, this area over here that says hide object when. So if you put something like is empty, Office Phone, That's sort of saying it as a positive. Well, in FileMaker land, that's positive. So if there is no, so this is actually backwards, and I did this backwards on purpose. So right now it's actually going to say phone is required if there actually is one. And so what you want to do is not is empty. So if not is empty, office phone, then this thing is hidden. And so it only shows up on a record that has no phone number. And then as soon as you put one in, then the field would go away. And you could have even trickier things on there, like looking at the format, things like that. So let's go to the next level up with this one. And that directly ties to another tip, which is tip number 5, and that is using calculations in a button bar. So rather than having this one say, having the widget on my layout be just a text label. So I'm going to move that off to the side, and I'm going to make a button bar. And I'll drag a button bar out to my layout, and it automatically comes with 3 segments. I delete 2 of them, and I'll say phone required. And then here, I can actually have an icon on this. And so what's great about this method is I can have something like a left arrow icon, and I can make it nice and large, like maybe 16 or 18 points, something like that. And then because this is in a theme, in the theme that I'm using, I have an invisible button bar. And then I can put that on there and put it like so. Then I'm just going to copy my code that I already wrote for the conditional visibility and assign that to the button bar. And then I can delete this. And now I get basically the same kind of a feature, but now I have more control over it. But you can do so much more than that. So for example, in my button bar, I can actually go kind of a step further than that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete that conditional visibility, and instead I'm going to write a simple statement in here. So rather than having it be just plain text in my button bar, I can actually say with a case statement, so if is empty office phone, then I can say there's a phone number required. And then maybe I'll put one other statement in here, like let's say that I don't have enough formatting. So let's say my standard for formatting of a phone number is to always have a dash. So I can say the pattern count, that's not the one that I want. So I can take a look in my phone number field, and in my phone number field, I'm looking for a dash. And if that number has less than 2 dashes, then I can show some different error, like formatting. And then if none of those things are true, you actually don't have to do this in a case statement. You can just leave it blank. But if none of those things are true, I can say then nothing, then no error. So this actually handles the conditional invisibility, so I only have to do this in one place. So let's see how that would work. So now I'll put in a phone number in with no dashes. And so it tells me formatting error. So it says, hey, there's a phone number, but it's not formatted right. If I put it in with 1 dash, it's going to be wrong because I still need this one. So now that I've got it in there right, it shows up. Now, one problem that I have here is the icon on the button still shows up. So I guess I really maybe do need my conditional visibility on the button after all, because the calculation part of it only applies to the text in the button. You can't have different calculations. So there actually is a way to do that, because individual segments of the button bar can have their own conditional visibility and their own calculations applied. So you can really extend this tool quite a bit. We're not going to go all the way down that road in this video. Instead, we're going to move on to number 4. And we've already seen it a little bit, which is to make this a little simpler to write, I started with a case statement. And let's move on to like another example. But if you start writing code with a case statement, it actually makes things really simple. Let's say that what I want is, rather than just a generic thing here to show me the one thing that's missing. I want to make a sort of a data quality check on my whole layout. So I'm going to go back into Data Viewer, and I'm going to start writing a calculation. And I'm going to put a few things together in it, right? So what I want to know is, let's just check for 3 things right now. I want to know if there's a work phone number, a mobile phone number, and an address. And the address is in a related table. And so I want to look at those 3 elements on this one, and this is going to tie to the next tip as well. But for right now, we're talking about the case statement. So I want to show an error that says case, there is no office phone, so is empty office phone. Then I'll put an error that says office phone missing. So that's a simple statement. I'll start with just that. Oh, I have to put a semicolon right there. So far, that's not that involved. And let me look at my data and we can see. So if I take that out, this will then say, oh, phone missing. So that's my error. So what I want to do is really kind of connect a couple of these things together. So, and then I maybe want another case statement. Case is empty. Main mobile phone, then another, mobile phone missing. Some error like that. Get my fingers working correctly. Now this gets a little trickier because now I see this, they're both actually missing here, but they're just concatenated together. So I need a little bit more stuff going on. So we can already see that this is a little bit easier than writing code in other ways. But what's I think really needed here to simplify this calculation is tip number 3, which is using the LUT statement. So to make this a little easier to write, I'm going to put it this way. I'm going to start with a LUT. And actually, a very frequent way that I start these is I start a calculation by hard coding things to look at things in my database. So for example, like an if statement or something like looking for a phone missing. And then I immediately start with a case with multiple tests and results. And then I immediately go to a LUT. And in a LUT, I'm pretty much always start with the parentheses and then the square bracket. And I start defining my short words, my variables internally for what I'm going to be testing for. So I'll call this one PH1 is going to be the work phone. PH2 will be the mobile phone. ADDR is going to be the related address. And that's going to be CU. And I'm not seeing it. It might actually be in this field. It is right there. Okay, it's not in a related table like I thought it was. So then I've got the first part of my LUT statement is how I define this. And then you close off the square bracket and you have a semicolon, and that basically goes down to your second part. So now this becomes a little bit simpler because you don't have to have the long field name in here. So you can say if is empty PH1. And then the same thing down here for PH2. But it can get even easier than that. And then I also have to close out my LUT statement at the end. Because I can actually put my test up here. So I can make this a little bit simpler by just having this say PH1, and that'll actually be not the phone number, but the result of the test. So I'm going to actually make another variable at the top here that says PH1 equals case is empty. Oh, fingers are not working well for me tonight. If is empty PH1, then office phone missing. So that's a very short case statement. It's also very important to have that, be in a case statement. Let's see if that works. And then I won't really, the other thing that's nice about writing LUT statements is you don't actually have to have, use all the variables that you define at the top. Let's see if that works. So I have an error in my code. Aha. I didn't notice my typo there. And I still have an error. So case is empty ph1. My code's not super obvious to me, but I bet it's obvious to everyone watching the video. So my case statement is open and closed. My is empty is open and closed. Maybe I'll just write that line over. I'm not really seeing exactly what's wrong. The other thing that's important about this that I want to mention is that one line of your LUT statement, the second line down, that you can define the same exact variable name as the first one. You can actually refer to, this will actually not refer to the one that's being instantiated right now. It refers to the previous one, which is great. If it's empty ph1, then office phone missing. I think I'm maybe not seeing this because the way I always write LUT statements or case statements is always like this. So let me put this in so I'm used to seeing it the way I look at it. I'm missing a quote. That's such an easy one. Okay, and you can see immediately I got feedback that I fixed my error. That was really painful for you guys watching, I'm sure, because you're like, you're missing a quote. So I can take out my punctuation to make this a little easier to read. All the returns and everything. But what's great is it did actually that work. Okay, so then once I'm done, and this is the other really, really important thing about the first tip that I showed, which is writing the code in Data Viewer, is once you've got it written and working, and we have more iterations to do here, you can just copy it to the clipboard. So I selected my code and copied it to the clipboard. And then I go to my layout. And then this thing up here, I'm going to move up, and I'm going to have that same code be in it. So I'll click on this and just select this and delete it. And instead, I'm going to use this as like an informational thing saying, oh, you've got some errors on your data entry here. And then, because really what I want it to be is showing all the different errors that might be wrong with this record. So if there's no work phone, no office phone, no address, etc., I can have the error show up. Well, that actually leads me directly to tip number 2, and stick around for tip number 1 because it's going to be a good one. Tip number 2 is to use the list function to join multiple lines of text together. So the next problem that I was going to have with this calculation is, I'm going to copy this same code for phone 2. So if I've got 2 phone numbers missing, phone 1 and 2, so ph2 is empty phone 2, then we can say mobile phone is missing. And then address is going to be the same thing again. Right? So what I really want to do is I want to sort of connect these 3 things together. Oh, so I've got an error in here. Oh, I don't have that set up. Oh, and on your very last variable that you define in a LUT, you have to not have this last trailing semicolon. So you see that when that was there, it doesn't calculate, but as soon as I take it out, then this will work. So what I really want is ph1 and ph2 and ph3, or ADDR, right? But I don't want them to show this way. I want them to be a list of the errors, but with space in the middle. So in other words, if I have an error here and here, I don't want to see a blank line in the middle. And so you can do this with a really complex calculation. Not that complex, but if you've got 5 or 6 things, it gets really ugly. And that comes to this particular tip, long-winded introduction. Tip number 2 is using the list function. List is great for a couple things. I'll take a quick aside after I do this one. But what I'm going to do here is use list and then just put in ph1 to an address. So that simple thing, just like that, will automatically take out any spaces for errors in the middle. So for example, so I'm going to go ahead and take that code and update my layout. Some of you are probably thinking, oh wow, that tip totally made this video worth it. Because it's not an obvious use of the list function. Update with what I written in the data viewer. And so what I really want to demonstrate is like how this will work if I delete different bits of data on this record. And so, for example, if there is no address, I think I want to keep it on the clipboard. Maybe you stick it down here. So now I've got everything missing, right? So work phone, mobile phone, and address. But if I have a work phone again, but now just the mobile phone is missing, notice that that little blank line goes away. So it's really perfect. If I then put an address in, I still get no trailing return. If I take the address out and put a mobile phone in, yeah, it's really, really clean in terms of how it does it. So it's a really functional thing. So the way that you're used to using the list function most likely is like this. And this is another really good use that I wanted to cover. It's usually used for looking at data in a portal. So for example, if I want to get the list of all of the IDs in the invoice table, that would be a good way to do it. Or maybe a better way to do it, more common, would be like all the dates that you would get, list of all the dates of the invoices. And as you flip through records, you can kind of see it shows you all that data, which is really, really great. And so frequently that's going to be a useful thing in a lot of calculations, especially when you combine that one with like JSON features. That brings me down to tip number 1. And that tip is using the getContainerAttribute function to show metadata for an image. So my last tab that I wanted to show in this sample file is image. And if I go to a record like this one, if I click on a photo, I'm going to want to know some things about that photo that might not be obvious. And so on this layout, we can see that I've got this feature here. And this code is so simple. Here's the code. It's getContainerAttribute. And it uses all. So when you go to this function, you choose the field, and that's going to be your image field. And then the attribute name is actually something you're going to have to look in the documentation for. They're all sort of hard-coded in. It's kind of like using the formatting functions for bold and italic and things like that. You just sort of have to know them. So that's also true here for the getContainerAttribute. In other words, they're not like shown in this little hint for writing it. So if I use the one for all, that grabs me all this data, which tells me the resolution of the image, the size that it's taking up in the database, and because it's external, most of the data is external. The total size of the file in bytes, so you'd want to divide that by 1024 to get kilobytes, or by a million, more than a million, to get megabytes. MD5, and then also what you can get from this is you can get specific things about it. So if you just want the width, then you can just change your function so that rather than saying all, it says width. That's just one that I happen to know will work. And then it just tells you the width, 1600 pixels. Okay, let's go back to all because I want to show you a little bit more about how this works. It's very, very good on certain types of data in your database. So images are especially good. If I have a PDF file like this one, I would really hope that it would give me a little bit more metadata, but it doesn't. So on the PDF, it tells me width and height of the PDF, which isn't really that useful. But it also tells me that the file size, so this is really a good thing. And if I take an image that I took myself, this is one I took at the LA Car Museum. I can't remember the name of the museum. And so this one will actually tell me information about the phone. So it tells me the model of the phone. At the time I took it, I had an iPhone 10. And the lat and long of where the picture was taken, if you have that information in your photos, which is pretty great. And then, of course, the size and other information. So this is a really, really useful thing. And I tie this one frequently to tests of an image to see if it's successfully stored or not. If a database has changed over time and some of the images are internal and some of them are external, it's really, really useful to be able to know that. Also, this is a really good way to determine if you've got images in the database that are too large. So if you've got, like if you only want images of a certain size, you can use this get container attribute to count up the number of pixels of width and then cut them down. So very, very useful calculation tip. And that is it for this video on calculation tips in FileMaker. Thanks very much for your time and have a great day.